When I think about being in the Boundary Waters and being there, especially in summer, paddling and the gliding of a canoe through reedy, windy rivers, coming out to a big lake, being able to hear the bubble of a waterfall or rapids on the other side, and knowing that the rapids marked on the map or you want to go right next to them. And so you sort of slowly get closer, and the water is usually calm but has this beautiful sort of tawny red tint to it. But you could stop in the middle of the lake and use your hands or your water bottle and drink water right out of the middle of the lake. I mean, it is abundant freedom.
Just give me 30 seconds of your time. First off, a huge thank you for listening because you tuning into the show week after week means the world to me. And it's proof that this dream that started way back when I was just a boy in Possum Hollow is bigger than I ever could have imagined. And secondly, we're just getting started. So if you enjoy what we do here, please join the 20% of listeners that listen to this show regularly and follow us on this app. So here's the promise I'm going to make to you. I'm going to do everything I can to make this show as good as it possibly can, even better, now and into the future. I'm going to deliver the guests that you want to listen to. I'm going to continue telling stories and compilations about hunting, fishing, rivers, mountains, and all of the other things that you enjoy about this show. Listen, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for listening to this show because without you, none of the things that we're doing at Walker School of the Wild would be possible. Thank you. Ingrid Lyons, welcome to the Wild Lab.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. You are the executive director of Save the Boundary Waters, and I wanted to have you on really to talk about what's happening right now in the Boundary Waters. I'm going to let you, because I want to let you be the expert on what's happening and tell the story. But just to preface for people that don't know, the U.S. House voted to overturn a 20-year mining ban, right, in the Superior National Forest, which feeds waterways, which feed the Boundary Waters Wilderness Canoe Area. And so I want to talk about that. But just as a preface, so folks can get to know you a little bit, get to know the Boundary Waters a little bit, I was hoping you could describe your first memory of the Boundary Waters. I know you're young. You're like 4. I read it in your bio, so maybe you don't, but like one of your earlier memories.
No, I definitely have good, strong early memories. I think especially given where I grew up, which was New York City, Ely, Minnesota, and the Boundary Waters was such a early informative environment experience for me, something just so totally different than what I was used to. And so I remember we went to a lake that is called Big Lake off the Echo Trail, which is one of the trails outside of Ely that folks use to get to entry points to the Boundary Waters. And the Boundary Waters actually has 2 sections. There's the Trout Lake unit and kind of the rest of the wilderness, and the Echo Trail goes between those 2 units. And this lake is in between those 2 units off the Echo Trail, so it seems like a Boundary Waters lake, but isn't actually in the Boundary Waters.
Yeah.
And I remember we went and it was a campsite and it felt like totally wild. It felt like we were just in dense, dense woods. It's funny seeing it now because it's a campsite that's part of a resort. So we were, really probably a stone's throw away from a multi-generation resort that's been on that lake for a long time. But we were given whistles, bright yellow whistles. And our parents said, go wander, explore, touch pine cones, do
Yeah.
whatever you want to do to sort of like settle into the environment and blow your whistle if you get in trouble or, anything like that. And fortunately, I never had to blow the whistle, but pretty shortly after we heard a whistle blowing, and my brother, who's only about a year and a half older than I am, had climbed up on a giant boulder and he couldn't get down. So I just remember everything feeling so massive. I've seen this rock since, and it's not that big, but it was just like such a novel, eye-opening experience. Uh,
Mhm.
so I think no matter how young folks are, they tend to remember their first Boundary Waters experience for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. Like going back to the rock and not noticing that it's really not that big of a rock, but when you're 5 years old, like, it probably seemed like a mountain and was
Yeah,
insurmountable to
exactly.
get down, you know? Yeah, I remember that too. I didn't start going in there until I was, like, 8 or 9 probably. but I went in would go in a lot with my father and lots of pairs of father-son trips in there. I mean, it's a lot of my core memories as a child from, like, 19 to 18, and maybe even into my 20s, early 20s were formed in the Boundary Waters. So it's a really special
I love
place
that.
to me as well.
Yeah.
Um, I'm I'm curious for you because now you you've gone from this little girl from 4 years old to, going in there with your parents and getting lost on rocks and with whistles and things, and now you're fighting for it, and I mean, I would imagine that there's a part of you that feels responsible for it. So I'm curious, like, when was that transition, or was there a moment when it became from a place that you just loved and experienced and felt a part of, to a place that you felt responsible for?
That's a good question. I think that I remember the first time hearing about the threat of copper mining facing the Boundary Waters, still this current threat, the Twin Metals Project. I went to college in Minnesota in part because of the Boundary Waters and wanting to have access to that place while being away from home, home away from home sort of situation. Save the Boundary Waters had just begun a little bit earlier, and a few really passionate folks were doing a bike tour of all the colleges in southern Minnesota, um, and dragging behind them a canoe where they were collecting signatures. And they came to my college, and I just remember being like, "What? Like, what's oh crap!
Mhm,
Something's going on. I have to." A light switch sort of turned on that's not been
mhm,
turned off ever since, and so I think I started feeling, I think over the course of that year and into the following, when I was actually hired by Save the Boundary Waters as their Northeast regional organizer in Duluth, I think that's when, married with my background in environmental um, studies, specifically conservation and development, and specifically a deep interest in the concept of American wilderness, I think over the course of that year is when I really felt like there's so much depth and complexity um, to the policy and history and cultural meaning of wilderness.
mm,
And so it's sort of, I'd read so much about this. And so to have it applied so immediately to a place that was so core to my understanding of the outdoors, the natural world beyond myself, how I'm a part of it, how big of a part it is for me. I think that was the kind of melding. It was a really powerful moment where it became
mhm.
what I was studying became super real.
Yeah. Yeah, we all, I think any of us that love wild places, love the wilderness, and spend a lot of time in them, and then inevitably end up fighting for them in whatever way that looks like. We all have those moments where it's like, "Oh, shit, like, if I don't do something here, like,
Yeah.
this thing that is, like, so central to me, not only, like, as an identity, but as, like, as a human, right,
Mhm.
can go away." I'm I know I actually don't know, I should know this number, and I should have researched it prior to jumping on with you, but I know there's, like, thousands of people that go to the Boundary Waters every year, and you can correct me on a number on that in a second. But for so it's a heavily visited place, but for people who have never been there, what does it what does it feel like when you're on a canoe in just this vast wilderness and strings of lakes and creeks and rivers and marshes and ponds? What does it feel like?
To me, it feels, it is such a sensory experience in that it is so quiet. I think that's something that really gets me about the wilderness, this particular wilderness that is unique. It is a quiet park, an official quiet park, but I think when I think about being in the Boundary Waters and being there, especially in summer, paddling and the gliding of a canoe through reedy, windy rivers, coming out to a big lake, being able to hear the bubble of a waterfall or rapids on the other side, and knowing that the rapids marked on the map or you want to go right next to them. And so you sort of slowly get closer, and the water is usually calm but has this beautiful sort of tawny
Mm,
red tint to it. But you could stop in the middle of the lake and use your hands or your water bottle and drink water right out of the middle of the lake.
mm,
It is abundant freedom. It's
Mm,
abundant sort of like lightness in a way. I think that's part of what also makes the wilderness so accessible. To your point, it's 150,000 people visit the Boundary Waters every year. Um, it's one of America's most visited wilderness areas. And it's extremely accessible because a lot of folks are able to paddle, even if they are paraplegics or if they have accessibility issues. You really feel light and enabled to be really within the landscape. I
mhm,
mean, I think that a lot of wilderness areas, people love climbing mountains, people like
mm,
hiking,
mm.
and that's all well and good, but there's something really magical about feeling deeply a part of a landscape or ecosystem instead of this sort of like this mountain is to be conquered or this rugged
Totally.
place is to be taken or, you know, challenged. It really you feel much more at ease, I feel like in the Boundary Waters. Perhaps that's the best way to say
Yeah. Yeah, no, listen, I do know exactly what you're saying,
it.
because while I do like to climb mountains and I do hunt and fish and do these things, it's the being immersed in the ecosystem, being immersed within the landscape that really keeps bringing me back, and I think is the biggest medicine that we can receive from places like the Boundary Waters. So, yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, and it is really a place where you can be in it and a part of it and not othered from it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so for those who don't know, or maybe people who've just heard the headlines or whatever, what actually what's actually happening right now? What exactly is the threat to the Boundary Waters? Give us the
Yeah.
story.
So the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northeastern Minnesota is the basically northern half of a watershed called the Rainy River watershed. The water flows north in that area. And the southern part of the watershed is the Superior National Forest. And for a long time, there have been hard rock mineral leases on federal lands and minerals in that portion of the watershed, which is immediately upstream of the wilderness. Save the Boundary Waters came into being when a few local folks from Ely, Minnesota gathered around a coffee table and said, I'm hearing that there's a company called Twin Metals that's owned by a Chilean mining conglomerate that is looking to renew these two federal mineral leases and develop a copper mine. And red flags went up and they started organizing a grassroots movement that has now grown over the course of the past decade to be the Save the Boundary Waters movement. We're a coalition of over 425 fish conservation, business, faith groups, etc.,
Mhm,
who are united in our vision to permanently protect the Boundary Waters watershed from the threat of copper mining.
mhm,
Um, and so we've been up against this massive project for over a decade now. And it's gone back and forth between administrations. I think in a perfect world, we were hoping that folks and working towards folks, having more of a sense that this is not a political issue,
mhm,
that it's a
mhm,
nonpartisan issue, that protecting
mhm,
this special place that is beloved by folks of all backgrounds, all stripes, all opinions is just a common sense thing to do.
mhm,
And we built our campaign off of facts and information and validity, in addition to that local core spirit. And the number one challenge was, copper mining's never been done in the state of Minnesota before. We have a long and proud legacy of mining in Minnesota, but iron and taconite mining, there's a lot of pride about, what we as a region and a state were able to do for the country during World War II and supplying so much of the steel that we used in the war effort. And that's absolutely important. And this is a totally different type of mining in terms of the potential devastating impacts of the pollution that it creates. So, you know, having never dealt with copper mining in our state before, we had to really understand and tackle, how do you work with the federal government to remove mineral leasing rights from a place? If a landscape is fundamentally the wrong place for an industry, how do you interface with the federal government? How do you petition the federal government to say, take action on that? And so we talked to a lot of different folks from across the country who had run successful campaigns against hard rock mines near precious and protected places and had them come to Ely, Minnesota and kind of give us a rundown on how we should build this thing.
Mhm.
And we've since built it out using that model, and we were able to achieve protections from in the watershed from copper mining in January of 2023, after years and years of effort, of massive involvement from the American people, the people of Minnesota, the Obama administration, the Biden administration, and what's happening right now with the Boundary Waters is that these protections are under threat
Mhm.
from congressional action. So these protections basically banned copper mining on all federal lands and minerals in the watershed of the Boundary Waters. So that's over 225,000 acres for up to 20 years. And that's just the allowable amount by law under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. So that was signed into effect by then Interior Secretary Deb Haaland in January of 2023. Mr. Pete Stauber, who is unfortunately the House representative for this area of Minnesota, has been a tremendously passionate advocate for the Twin Metals mine
Mhm.
and for copper mining in general, I'll say. And he has tried many times over the course of the past 13 months to pass legislation that would overturn these watershed protections and actually grant mineral leases to the company Twin Metals Minnesota, who wants to develop this four deposit copper mine immediately upstream of the wilderness. Mr. Stauber's attempts have failed. He was trying to attach his language to must pass legislation like budget reconciliation, appropriations, the National Defense Authorization Act, and time again, he failed. And so now what we're seeing is an unprecedented use of a law called the Congressional Review Act that is intended to allow Congress to scrutinize and reject rules that are created by agencies. And rules, I emphasize that word because in order for rules to be scrutinized by the CRA, they have a very specific definition. And often agency actions have to be evaluated to see if they apply as rules such that they could be scrutinized by the Congressional Review Act. If, in fact, a rule is challenged under the Congressional Review Act, what makes it particularly dangerous is that it only requires a simple majority vote in both chambers and is not subject to the Senate filibuster. So it is a fast track way to overturn something that Congress doesn't like.
Mhm.
Mineral withdrawals or public land orders, these types of protections in the watershed of the Boundary Waters have never been determined to be rules applicable to scrutiny under the CRA, ever.
Mhm.
But Mr. Stauber is moving forward. As you said, the House already voted to pass the resolution to rescind the mineral withdrawal, and now we are awaiting a Senate vote on that same resolution. And that would strip those really important protections in the watershed and basically create a path for Twin Metals Minnesota to begin to get leases, apply for permits, submit a mine plan of operations, and lay the groundwork for making a copper mining district in the headwaters of the Boundary Waters.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. I appreciate that. It's 2 things. 1, it's Twin Metals, Minnesota, but I was under the impression that it was a Chilean mining company. Is the Minnesota title just a moniker?
Yes, so Twin Metals Minnesota is a wholly owned subsidiary of Antofagasta, a Chilean mining company owned by one of the wealthiest families in South America.
Right, so it's not an American company. And
Mm-mm.
as you said, like, Minnesota has dealt with mining for a very, very long time, and, like, and probably in really collaborative ways. But what makes a sulfur or a copper sulfide mine different? Why is that so much more potentially different than any other type of mining that's traditionally done in Minnesota?
Yeah, so what makes it unique is that, and we're going to get into a little geology
Yeah,
here
let's do it.
in just a second. So Minnesota's iron ore and taconite mining is in an area called the Iron Range, and that sits on top of something called the Mesabi complex. The Mesabi complex is a huge sort of ore body, rock body, that comes into contact with another ore body in the north called the Duluth complex. And these two rock bodies are fundamentally different. So in one, you find iron ore and taconite. In the other, you find things like copper and nickel. The Duluth complex, which is what the company is hoping to mine and starts basically around immediately south of the Boundary Waters, it contains these hard rock minerals, but it's important to be specific in why we call this industry sulfide ore copper mining is because the ore body contains sulfides.
Hmm.
And so when it is mined and the rock is brought to the surface and it interacts with air and water, it creates a chemical reaction that generates sulfuric acid.
Mm.
That sulfuric acid then basically erodes out, pulls out the other heavy metals, toxic heavy metals that are in that ore body, and creates slush, a runoff that is so ubiquitous in this industry. It actually has its own name. It's called acid mine drainage. And folks may be familiar with this concept because maybe they saw pictures of the Animas River in Colorado a few years ago, or they've seen
Right.
pictures from the Mount Poly Canadian mine tailings dam collapse. Essentially, it's this thick, orange, highly acidic, highly metallic slurry that is particularly dangerous in water. Copper mines of this nature have never actually been done anywhere in the world without some form of pollution to surrounding ground and surface water. And a lot of times, these industries, these mine types are in arid southwestern places like Arizona, where the water is not particularly abundant. And still there, you see significant water pollution. And so, I mean, I chose this background for a reason. This isn't like the most water rich part of the Boundary Waters that I'm showing. This is just what the Boundary Waters is.
Right.
And so if you pollute, in one section, there's no way you're going to be able to contain it. And that highly, highly, highly acidic material would be devastating for this very, very vulnerable ecosystem.
Ingrid, can you say that last line again about how frequently these sulfide copper mines pollute?
Yeah, absolutely. There actually is no copper mine that's ever been built, created in the world that hasn't had some form of pollution to surrounding surface and groundwater. So when we talk about the risk, America's most visited wilderness, over 1 million acres of deeply interconnected freshwater and boreal forest, it's not worth it. It's
No.
such high risk for very, very little reward.
No, absolutely not. I totally agree with you. What is at risk? We've talked about ecologically, and maybe you can talk about that a little bit more. But what is really at risk here with this mine going to place? Because it's not just ecological, although that is primarily, but there's other risks as well, right? There's
Yeah.
economic and jobs and all these other things. So what are the risks if this mine goes?
Yeah. So just to complete the thought on the ecologic risks, the Boundary Waters is, like I said, 1.1 million acres of deeply interconnected freshwater and boreal ecosystem, but it's also surrounded by several other landscapes, including Canada's Quetico Provincial Park and Voyageurs National Park, which is immediately to the northwest. And so when you put all of these landscapes together, it's not just 1 million acres, it's actually over 4.4 million acres of continuous freshwater ecosystem. And I hate to be a cynic, I'm inclined to be an optimistic person, but I think wars will be fought over freshwater in the not too distant future. And
Hmm.
we have such an incredible resource, such a wealth of abundantly clean freshwater that you can drink from the middle of the lakes.
Hmm.
And so that is a huge ecological and public health risk, frankly. This water also feeds people. The Anishinaabe people of Minnesota hold treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather in this area. Their sacred cultural crop is wild rice, which is
Hmm.
uniquely vulnerable to sulfate pollution. So, in terms of ecosystem health, pollution running through the ecosystem, making it so that the fish aren't edible, it really could have devastating consequences ecologically and culturally. I'd also say, economically, the Boundary Waters supports a robust outdoor amenity model of economics in the
Hmm.
region. So, regionally, the Boundary Waters supports 17,000 jobs.
Hmm.
And Minnesota actually has one of the nation's fastest growing outdoor recreation industries. And that industry generates over $13.5 billion in revenue for the state of Minnesota every single year. And that's growing quickly. And that is so much anchored in this concept of North Country, Lake Country, the woods, the waters, the fishing, the hunting, the paddling. And so when you think about what would be at risk if the boundary waters were damaged or polluted, you're talking about an entire industry that supports not just the region in very, very real ways, but the entire state
Hmm.
and is fundamentally sustainable. It's a sustainable model when compared to the boom and bust cyclical model of extractive industries like mining. And unfortunately, we have seen that in Minnesota. I mean,
Yeah.
we often deal with this boom in iron and taconite mining followed by massive layoffs and
Hmm.
challenges because, you're at the whims of an international metals market. You're only at the whims of kind of your own ability to stand up for this wild place when you
Right.
in supporting an outdoor recreation based economy. So that's also a tremendous risk. And there's economic elements to this piece too, but there are some of those intangibles. The number of camps
Mm.
and youth programs
Yeah. Yeah.
and Boy Scouts that would be shut down, that wouldn't be able to do their programming. Voyager Outward Bound School, which works with a whole array of people from veterans suffering with PTSD to youth that are perhaps having mental health issues or behavioral issues at home with their families. They go to the wilderness to heal. They go to the wilderness to build character and confidence. The number of people in Washington, D.C., when I mention the Boundary Waters and I say it just loud enough so that people around me can hear, who turn and say, I went to the Boy Scout camp on Moose
Hmm.
Lake,
Hmm.
off the Fernberg Trail in the Boundary Waters. It's really stunning how many people have those experiences. And so I think the ripple effects of youth, veterans, and others who have found confidence, solace, autonomy, healing, development in this place, you know, it'd be really tragic to lose that for future generations.
And once you lose it, you're not getting it back, right?
No,
Nope, it's
no.
gone forever. Well, listen, Ingrid, I really appreciate it, and I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got to go here in a little bit. What can people actually do? Well, actually, two questions. What does a win look like for you guys? What does a win look like for the Boundary Waters? And then what do people actually do?
Yeah. So for us, a win is protections for the Boundary Waters watershed from this type of mining codified into law. So it would be a law on the federal level that says copper mining is banned on federal lands and minerals in the watershed of the Boundary Waters. And there'd be a complementary bill on the state level that would say copper mining is banned on all state lands in the watershed of the Boundary Waters, and we will not permit a mine in this area. That is the strongest or most durable form of permanent protection that we can achieve as a movement, and that has been our goal from day one. What folks can do is, we like to say, speak loudly for this quiet place, and that can take a lot of different forms. So I think sometimes people kind of push this off as a Minnesota issue, you know, let the Minnesotans deal with it. And while
Mm.
clearly we can take care of a lot of stuff over here, this is a national issue. This is
Mhm.
an iconic piece of American public land, and it belongs to me as much as it belongs to you, as much as it belongs to the next person. And we all have a say. And right now, your voices are being silenced. Over 675,000 Americans commented as part of the public input process when the government was considering putting in place this mining ban, and over 98% said we want the boundary waters protected.
Right,
And here
right.
we are now, seeing a representative who the majority of his district doesn't want this project fighting for a Chilean mining company against the wishes of the American people, against American interests. So speak up. I think every senator has a role to play in this vote on the resolution. They need to hear from you. We are
Mhm.
trying to share as many resources as we can to make it as easy as possible for you to call your senator's office. And then next week, when they're in recess, call their in state offices every single day, leave voicemails, send messages, make noise, because we've seen as a community what making noise can actually do. The
Mhm.
public land sell off last summer, it wasn't on my bingo card to have public lands be the thing that unite
Right.
Americans in a time of unprecedented division. But how
Well,
awesome.
yeah, I've been touting it for a little while. I think it's a
You were
thing for
right.
sure.
You can say,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
told you so. I was delighted. I mean, I knew conceptually that that was true, but to have so many people speaking out so boldly from so many walks of life had a tremendous impact, and we can do
yeah,
the same. And so
yeah.
get involved, spread the word. Maybe you went there as a kid one time and it was magical. Maybe you've never gone there, but you love the concept. You like this background. Everybody has a role to play.
Well, and I do wanna, like I said, I wanna be respectful of time, but I wanna reiterate the one thing that you did say is that it's not just a Minnesota problem, it's a national problem because the congressional the review process that they are using to overturn this mining bill, right? They could potentially use it anywhere to overturn any sort of bill that's protecting any sort of public lands in the United States. So it's a little bit of a slippery slope as I understand it, right? Like if it's lost here, it can be lost in Arizona, it can be lost in California, it can be lost, Montana, wherever, right?
Yeah, so the Congressional Review Act, the use of the Congressional Review Act to challenge this public land order and this particular protection is a Pandora's box. I mean, it sets a really dangerous precedent for all public lands across the country because it basically opens up the ability for Congress to attack and politicize and nullify any past agency action.
Mhm.
So if the Department of Interior made a resource management plan or the Bureau of Land Management, which is under the Interior, but any agency that creates these plans or things that have not before been determined to be rules allowed to be scrutinized under the CRA, all of a sudden they're up for grabs and Congress can nullify them. The ripple effects are profound. I mean, a resource management plan, protections, etc. People build their lives and their practices and their engagement and systems around these decisions, and some of them
Yeah.
haven't been in place for years. And so it's really going to cause, I think, a lot of chaos for a lot of landscapes and a lot of communities that are near these places. I am not going to be excited to say to Congress, I told you so. I think that this is really and it's something, that everybody's got to think about. What does it mean for the use of the CRA when the administration changes? I mean,
Right.
it's not a one side thing.
Absolutely. Like, can't be a political football that we pass back and forth every 4 years or every 2 years or whatever, depending on who's in the White House or who's
Yeah.
in Congress. It is, in my opinion, I think it really is, our natural resources, our wild places, our clean water and clean air. I mean, they are bipartisan issues, right? They are left, right, middle, whatever. Everyone needs these things. Absolutely envision a world where they are not passed back and forth like a political football every few years because um yeah, not only is it exhausting, it's not sustainable, and the American people don't want it either, quite clearly.
Right. And it's
You
a
know,
waste. It is a tremendous waste
yeah,
of taxpayer dollars.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
the things that folks could be focused on if they weren't so hell bent on a bad idea is
Mm,
incredible.
mhm.
It's kind of that's a whole
That's
nother
a whole
rabbit
other thing, Ingrid.
hole.
Yes, there's a lot of people focused on bad ideas out there. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
different podcast.
Yes.
I want so Yeah, wanna wrap this up, but I wanna I'm curious because I actually don't know the answer to this. If this mine were approved, how quickly would things move? Do you know?
So, yeah, so if the resolution passes out of the Senate and is signed by the president, the protections that are currently blocking the administration from issuing mineral leases to the company would be gone. And so what we've seen as, especially over the past 12 months, is a lot of indications that Congress and the proponents of the Twin Metals mine are working directly with the administration. And that's taken there's a few different examples of that. But what that leads me to believe is that the second this bill passes, I just wouldn't be surprised at all if the administration has these mineral leases ready to go, if the company has its mine plan of operations ready to go. And so I think we could see pretty quick movement on the advancement of this project. Now, it still takes a tremendous amount of time for a mine to
Mhm.
actually sort of start and be in operation. And one really critical step, so if you have Minnesotan listeners, this really in particular applies to them, is that the state of Minnesota, no matter if a mine is proposed on state land, private land, or federal land, the state of Minnesota must give that project a state permit to mine in order for operations to begin. And the state could not do that.
Mhm.
And so the state is an absolutely critical backstop
Mm.
to everything that's going on the federal level, which is also why you see attacks at the federal level on our environmental regulations, specifically as
Mm.
they apply to states'
Yeah.
rights in environmental review. So people
Right.
need to keep their eyeballs open, stay
Mhm.
aware, but also let our leaders in Minnesota know that how absolutely critical it is that they stand up for the boundary waters.
Yeah, I did not know that last piece. That actually gives me some solace, and it's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not all just up to the feds,
Yeah,
thankfully,
yeah,
at
yeah, yeah.
least for now.
Right. Okay. I want you just to humor me for a moment, and I want you to imagine maybe 50 years from now, and I don't know what your family structure is like or whatever, but, like, what do you hope 50 years from now, your grandchildren or your friends or whatever, what do you hope they experience in the Boundary Waters 50 years from
I hope they experience the feeling of awe and wonder. I hope they
Mhm.
can see all the stars in the dark sky. I hope they can go in the dead of winter and everything's properly frozen and there's good snow. And I'd love for them to be able to experience vibrant wilderness edge communities where folks are united in their love of place and not divided over this sort of false us versus them narrative. And to like feel, I think it's so like basic just to feel that sense of freedom, that feeling of freedom that I started with, where you're just sort of
Mhm.
you feel light and you feel immersed in a landscape that is truly unique,
Mm.
truly wild, and truly beloved and protected as such.
Yeah, I'm with you. We need more places like that because so much of our lives are tied up in email notifications and spam and
We all
meetings
need to
and
touch a
Zoom calls.
little more grass.
Yeah, 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 as the kids say, absolutely, touch a little more grass.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ingrid, I wanna give you the last word. Give highlight what folks can do again, how they can find you at Save the Boundary Waters, yeah, and just tell our listeners how they can help.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd encourage everyone to do what they can to speak loudly for this tremendously quiet place. You can go to savetheboundarywaters.org and we have an action center. And basically, you can pick, if you're a Minnesotan, we have options for you. If you are from somewhere else, we have action forms and language and ways that you can get involved. If you've been calling your senators every day, we are so grateful. And we have a lot of other ways you can help. If you're a passionate writer, can write a letter to the editor. If you're a volunteer coordinator, you can reach out and we can get you going wherever you're from. So there's a place for everybody in this movement. And you can check out all the opportunities at savetheboundarywaters.org. And yeah, I'm so appreciative of everybody who's willing to stand up for this very special place.
Well, we're appreciative of you, Ingrid. I really, yeah, appreciative of you and the work that you're doing, and let's save the Boundary Waters.
Hell yeah. Let's.
Right on. Thank you, Ingrid. I appreciate your
Thank you
time.
so much, Ned. Yeah, feel free to follow up with any questions or if you need any resources, we're happy to give them.
Absolutely. All right. We'll talk with you later.
Sounds good. Thank you.
If this conversation stirred something in you and you're feeling called to get out into the boundary waters yourself, then I urge you to check out our upcoming Boundary Waters canoe trip this coming August that we are running in collaboration with our friends over at Nature is Not Metal. To check it out and all the other ways that you can connect with yourself and the land with Walker's School of the Wild, head on over to www.stepintoyourwild.com or on all the socials. Step into your wild. And remember, stay curious, stay connected, and stay wild.